Imagine a city of neon illusions where fortunes change with the shuffle of a deck and a whisper can be deadlier than a bullet. Imagine a world where power is absolute and betrayal is a daily occurrence. In that world, a small, sharp-eyed man from Chicago steps into the blinding lights of Las Vegas not to be entertained, but to control the show from the shadows. Welcome to the story of Anthony Tony Spilotro, the outfit's enforcer turned desert kingpin, a man whose craving for the spotlight became the spark that burned his empire to the ground. Picture Grand Avenue on a cold Chicago morning in the 1950s. The smell of bread and sausage drifting from a neighborhood deli, kids running errands for quarters, the tight rhythm of a community that knows what not to ask and who not to cross. In the back of Patsy's deli, men in suits drink coffee, their eyes scanning, never wandering. Sam Giancana, Jackie Cerrone, Gus Alex, Frank Nitty's old crew. And in the doorway stands a boy, short and coiled like a spring, watching everything. He shines shoes. He carries parcels, he listens, he learns. He is the fifth of 6 sons in a cramped, 2-story house. He is Anthony Spilotro, son of Pasquale Patsy Spilotro, whose meatballs draw cops and crooks to the same counter, whose name lends the boy access to a world no school will ever teach. What makes a boy fall in love with danger? Is it the proximity of power? The nod from a man everyone fears? The realization that rules are suggestions for those who can afford to ignore them? Tony met a kid his age one afternoon while arguing over shoeshine territory, a hot-headed scuffle that nearly became a friendship-ending feud. The boy was Frank, bright-eyed and fast-talking, destined to become Tony's shadow and eventually his judge. Tony's father, hearing the name, asked if Frank was kin to a man who'd once done him a favor, a driver with a reputation that scared trouble off like thunder. That fragile thread of loyalty rerouted Tony's anger. Tony and Frank made peace. Together, they formed a crew. Tony's brothers, a few neighborhood kids, loyalty stitched together by proximity and ambition. At first, the crimes were small: break-ins, vandalism, teenage bravado dressed as mischief. But mischief matures quickly in the right environment. The crew learned to follow bank customers who left with fat envelopes and to strike when the street grew quiet. They learned that planning beats luck, that teamwork beats muscle, and that fear, administered correctly, pays better than fists. Frank spent his take on a brand new Cadillac, a teenager's dream on gleaming wheels. Tony didn't. Tony knew better. He warned Frank to return the car. In their world, a fast car was a flare in the sky saying, "Come tax me." Tony used his cut to curry favor with men at the top of the outfit. What is the price of admission to a greater stage? Sometimes it's your pride. Sometimes it's your silence. Soon, Tony drew close to a feared outfit enforcer known simply as the Saint, a compact killer whose size deceived and whose reputation did not. Through him, doors opened. Introductions were made. Tony made his intentions plain to Frank. One day, I'll run it all. Was it teenage bluster or prophecy? The moment to prove himself came in 1962, when unruly violence violated unspoken rules. 2 armed thieves on the fringes, Billy McCarthy and Jimmy Moralia, drank too much in a bar aligned with the outfit. They were beaten and thrown out by the bar's guardians, 2 brothers known and respected in the neighborhood. Humiliated, Billy and Jimmy plotted revenge in the worst place they could choose, Elmwood Park, a quiet enclave that sheltered judges, politicians, and high-ranking outfit men. It was the wrong neighborhood for wrong behavior. When the brothers and a companion pulled to a stop, the gunman opened fire. 3 bodies slumped. The silence that followed was not peace. It was a storm gathering. Why does one reckless act matter more than others? Because some streets aren't just streets, they're sanctuaries, and violating them is not a crime, it's an insult. The outfit demanded answers. Who had dared to spill blood where blood should never fall? Tony, ever the opportunist, saw his chance. He asked Frank to lure Billy to a meeting with a story about a big score. Nothing urgent, just 2 friends with a plan. Frank hesitated, then relented. Tony made another stop first, stepping from the car to speak to the driver of a dark Ford idling in the lot. Back in Frank's car, Tony said only, "We're good." They drove on. What followed is legend. Repeated in whispers and shouted on witness stands, a quiet restaurant, a friendly chat, and then steel hands grabbing Billy as he reached for his car door. He was bundled into a vehicle and taken to a garage in the outfit's grip. Hours passed. Questions were asked. Answers were not. Finally, an old mechanic's tool became an instrument of terror. Billy's head was clamped in a vise, tightened slowly, deliberately, until pain forced a name past his clenched teeth. Jimmy. The message was clear. Disrespect begets punishment. Punishment begets confession. Confession begets a burial no one can find. The duo would not trouble Elmwood Park again. Was Tony made that night? Honor in that world is transactional, and timing is everything. He believed he had earned it. The men above him were watching. They liked results. They respected nerve. They rewarded discretion, most of the time, but another storm flashed across his horizon. A senior enforcer, allied with Giancana, someone no one defied, returned from a trip to find his home ransacked, his wife terrorized, $400,000, and her jewelry gone. Furious, he ripped through files and phony friends, looking for the thief. He suspected Tony. Tony was summoned to a basement, seated in a chair, asked pointed questions. He deflected with arrogance. The enforcer snapped, shoved him to the floor, and squeezed his throat until the room went purple around the edges. Tony later told Frank that his life could have ended that night, if not for a friend. Frank Rosenthal, Lefty, a gambler with a genius for odds and a face made for command, intervened. He vouched for Tony's mouth outrunning his brain. The enforcer relented. He issued a warning that would echo in Tony's head for years. Betray me, and I erase your entire family. Fear teaches. So does survival. Tony survived. His reputation grew anyway. As the 1960s gathered speed, Tony became what the outfit valued, a man who earned. He ran bookmaking on Chicago's Northwest Side. He built burglary crews that treated security systems like puzzles, not walls. He learned to shake hands with opportunity and choke off doubt. He partnered, uneasily, with Samuel Mad Sam DeStefano, a sadistic loan shark whose courtroom theatrics and cruelty made even mobsters wary. To access sealed court information and identify informants, Tony even operated as a faux bail bondsman, extracting names and addresses from files never meant for his eyes. One card in that file belonged to FBI agent William Romer, a hunter whose patience matched Tony's arrogance. One afternoon, Tony tracked Romer from a gym to a shaded edge of Columbus Park, expecting to spy on a meeting. He peered around a corner to find a pistol leveled at his face. "Looking for me, friend?" Roma asked. Tony smirked. Just taking a walk. Isn't this a public park? He refused to answer questions, refused to acknowledge the surveillance, refused to show fear. Roma would later vent to colleagues and reporters about that little pipsqueak, a phrase that would be softened for print, transformed by media standards and Tony's stature into a nickname he carried like a dare. Tony the Ant. Did Tony hate the name? Perhaps, but he loved attention. Cameras found him, and he rewarded them with a grin and a pose, while other mobsters flinched from the flashbulbs. Was it confidence, or the first hint of a fatal vanity? Police pressure mounted. Surveillance teams trailed him, day and night. His home was raided, his operations disrupted, his name scribbled in notebooks and typed into reports. And yet Tony stayed a step ahead, speaking in code, avoiding paper trails, treating silence as insurance. Fines were paid, jail time was avoided. The outfit learned that the law could be managed like any other opponent, with allies, with cash, with caution. Then came the assignment that would define him and destroy him. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, the outfit's man in Las Vegas, a feared figure whose presence made pit bosses sweat, was blacklisted by Nevada's Gaming Control Board. The Black Book barred him from every casino. The bosses in Chicago needed a new hand and a watchful eye to safeguard a river of illicit revenue, the skim. On paper, the casinos belonged to respectable owners. In practice, their floors and counting rooms belonged to men in Chicago and Kansas City and Milwaukee and Cleveland. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity. Remove cash before it became part of any ledger, send it home uncounted, and make the profit look like magic. Tony was chosen to protect the magic. His partner in the desert would be his old friend Frank Lefty Rosenthal, an odds maestro whose mind worked like a scoreboard. Under the Argent Corporation, a shell with clean hands, the outfit quietly controlled 4 casinos on the Strip, including the Stardust and the Fremont. The nominal owner was Alan Glick, young, presentable, unthreatening, a perfect face for public consumption. Lefty would orchestrate the back-of-house alchemy, access to count rooms, manipulation of staffing, 1,000 small adjustments that made the skim flow smoothly. Tony's job was more primal. Keep everyone in line, collect, intimidate, protect the pipeline. In 1971, Tony moved his wife Nancy and their 4-year-old son Vincent into a modest 3-bedroom house in a middle-class Las Vegas neighborhood. He attended his son's Little League games, shook hands with neighbors, and cultivated the image of a suburban family man. But Las Vegas is a city where images are currency and illusions are work. The FBI and local police, pre-warned by their Chicago counterparts, trailed him from the moment he landed. He had traded one fishbowl for another. What do enforcers do when placed in a city built on secrets? They make their presence known. Tony saw a Las Vegas that was quieter than legend suggested. Purposefully so. The skimming families wanted low crime, low attention, and steady cash. Tony had other plans. He imported his own crew. He imposed a street tax on bookies, loan sharks, drug dealers, and pimps. Pay or vanish. Bodies were occasionally left where they would be found. Messages were written without ink. Among those who came west under his umbrella was Frank Carlotta, Tony's childhood ally, fresh from 6 years in prison for a botched armored car heist. Carlotta had learned patience behind bars. Tony had learned dominance in desert sunlight. Together, they formed the nucleus of a burglary team the press would later dub the Hole in the Wall Gang, named for their method of entry rather than any sense of romance. They chewed through roofs and walls with precision, bypassing alarms as if they'd installed them, leaving few witnesses and fewer clues. Tony took a cut from everything they touched, and sometimes, to maximize returns, he would direct his crew to rob someone and then sell the same target protection, without ever revealing that the problem and the solution came from the same source. Las Vegas bent under Tony's hand. He bought influence in the sheriff's office. He courted court clerks for jury information. He recruited a man in the phone company to tip him off to wiretaps. He ran up sports betting losses so frantically that even with his skim share, he was always hunting for quick cash. He collected, intimidated, and commanded. He worked dizzying days. 18 hours at the Gold Rush, the jewelry store he used as a headquarters and a hub, yet kept no notes, no ledgers. Everything was in his head. He trusted only what he could remember and what he could enforce. Cameras loved his swagger. He loved them back. But the attention he courted aggravated the men who preferred their power to be unseen. Law enforcement responded with a task force, more than 20 agents assigned to one man. They bugged the Gold Rush. They watched his lips and believed he knew they were watching. He covered his mouth with his hand whenever he spoke. He frowned or smiled to signal approval or consent. He turned facial expressions into orders. How do you catch a man who refuses to speak? By listening harder or by waiting for him to be betrayed? Behind the facade of suburbia, chaos churned. Tony's marriage frayed and then cracked. He and Nancy slept in separate beds, exchanged words only to fight. In one shocking incident, agents monitoring his store overheard an argument and feared it would turn deadly. They dialed 911, pretending to be restaurant workers, unwilling to reveal their surveillance and worried local police might be compromised. By the time officers arrived, the danger had receded. No charges were filed. The silence held, for now. Meanwhile, Tony's national profile climbed further, not because of violence, but because of glitz. Lefty Rosenthal, blocked by Nevada regulators from obtaining a gaming license due to his outfit ties, stacked his new title, Director of Food and Beverage at Argent, into a platform. He wrote a newspaper column. He launched a televised talk show, filmed in casino lounges, chatting with celebrities, athletes, and crooners, Jim Brown, Frank Sinatra, turning himself into a local star. Tony watched the applause from a corner table, nursing a drink and a grudge. When Lefty walked into a nightclub to a wave of handshakes, Tony remained seated, jaw tight. "Look at that arrogant so-and-so," he muttered. "Thinks he's too good to say hello." Was it envy? Fear? The realization that Lefty's fame drew heat Tony would have to absorb? The outfit wanted low noise. Tony was becoming the soundtrack. In 1972, Chicago prosecutors indicted Tony for a 1963 murder, tied to a feud with Mad Sam DeStefano that had left a debtor dead in a place where no man would be found alive by accident. The key witness was an outfit insider flipping his loyalties. Tony and Mad Sam were co-defendants. Mad Sam was spiraling. He showed up in court in pajamas, seated in a wheelchair, shouting through a megaphone. Tony worried that such clownishness would contaminate the jury. Then, just weeks before trial, a masked figure stepped into Mad Sam's garage and fired a shotgun. 2 blasts. 1 corpse, no arrest. The FBI suspected Tony's hand in the killing, an act of self-preservation dressed as convenience. When Tony's verdict came, it landed like a clean bill of health. Not guilty. He boarded a plane to Nevada the same day. In the 5 years after Tony's arrival, Las Vegas recorded more homicides than in the prior quarter century combined. Coincidence or cause? The FBI thought the answer was obvious. They arrested Tony repeatedly. He walked free repeatedly. He moved through courtrooms like a tourist through hotel lobbies, glancing around, never staying long. How do you incarcerate someone who refuses to leave fingerprints on anything that matters? Still, pressure accumulates. When the Nevada Gaming Control Board added Tony Spilotro to the famous Black Book, officially banning him from every casino in the state, it wasn't just an embarrassment. It was a strategic problem. How do you supervise a skim when you can't set foot on the carpet? Around the same time, a massive raid on the gold rush made front pages. 50 agents, papers seized, cash collected, tape recorders lifted, and yet in the end, no charges that stuck. What remained was the stink of constant scandal, something Chicago found unforgivable. Meanwhile, Tony turned inward and downward. Paranoia grew roots. He proposed wild schemes to Frank Rosenthal, return to Chicago, eliminate the outfit's top layer, then dictate terms to the other families in New York, Kansas City, Philadelphia. Frank tried to tether him to reality. "They won't allow it," he said. "Then we remove them too," Tony replied. Was he dreaming? Declaring war on everyone is a form of suicide. His delusions didn't stop with domination. They bled into his closest alliance. Tony became entangled with Lefty's wife, Geri. The affair was a secret that wasn't. It deepened rifts, turned allies into rivals, and gave Chicago's leadership another reason to see Tony's desert reign as a liability. In an organization where loyalty is currency, his account was overdrawn. The breaking point arrived on Independence Day, 1981. Fireworks echoed across the Strip. Sirens followed. The hole-in-the-wall gang had targeted a store they believed held a mountain of cash. They did what they always did: cut through the roof, moved like ghosts, reached for the safe. But there was a ghost in their own crew. The alarm specialist had turned informant. Police swarmed. Arrests stacked up. It wasn't just the burglary crew that faced handcuffs. Across the Midwest, federal prosecutors cracked a multi-city skim case wide open, bringing down major outfit figures whose names had stayed out of headlines for decades. For those men, the message was clear. The Las Vegas operation was no longer a golden egg. It was a spotlight. How did Chicago react? They did their accounting. They tallied scandals, arrests, front-page stories, task forces, bans, raids. The number they arrived at was simple: one. One man at the center of too much attention. One man whose name filled too many headlines. One man whose public appetites outpaced his private discipline. Tony. Even then, Tony didn't see it. His priority was survival. He calculated that the government's best shot at him required a witness who could place him at the summit of conspiracy, someone who had heard orders directly. The informant inside the burglary crew couldn't do it. He'd never met Tony face to face. That left Frank Rosenthal. One morning, Frank woke to gunfire outside his window, watched masked men sprint to a van, and felt the math shift in his bones. Weeks later, the FBI played him a recording. Tony ordering a contract on Frank's life. Friendship was over. Frank flipped. He confessed to more than 6 murders under Tony's command. He described the Elmwood Park vengeance. He described the hole-in-the-wall burglaries. He described the taxes, the threats, the systems, the skeleton beneath Las Vegas's skin. But in court, words must be matched with proof. Tony's lawyers attacked Frank's credibility. Deals had been made. Juries doubted. Tony walked again, acquitted only to face new charges tied to the casinos. The trap was tightening, even if the jaws had not yet snapped. What does a condemned man look like before he knows his sentence? Sometimes he looks like a man about to be promoted. On June 14, 1986, Tony visited his brother Michael's home in the suburbs of Chicago. The two drove to a hotel parking lot to meet a senior outfit figure. They believed they were being honored. Tony with a new role, Michael with full initiation. They followed a car to a quiet house not far away. They were led downstairs. Instead of ritual, violence. Instead of a pledge, a verdict. A group of outfit members, some of them men Tony had known for decades, surrounded them. The beating was swift and final. The brothers' bodies were placed in a trunk, driven across the Illinois line into Indiana, and buried in a cornfield near Willow Slough. 6 days later, a farmer noticed disturbed earth. Police unearthed two men, stripped to their underwear, one laid atop the other. Tony Spilotro was 48 years old. Michael was 41. Is there justice in a world without laws, or just different kinds of punishment? For the outfit's leadership, this was a solution, not a crime. Remove the lightning rod, reduce the storm, reclaim the quiet they valued more than any territory. What remains when you scrape away the myths and movie versions is a portrait of a man both inevitable and avoidable. Inevitable because men like Tony often rise in systems that reward cunning, nerve, and cruelty. Avoidable because the very traits that fueled his ascent made his fall unavoidable. He changed Las Vegas in ways no one in the outfit had planned. He turned a city calibrated for profit into a battlefield of ego and media. He strutted where others tiptoed. He craved cameras where others planted bugs. He mistook notoriety for power. But is that the whole truth? Or is there a darker symmetry at work? Without Tony, the skim might have continued longer, growing fatter and more invisible. With him, the city's quiet corruption became noisy crime, triggering the law's full fury. Was Tony a cancer or a cure the body rejected? Did he expose weaknesses that would have gone unnoticed until it was too late? Or did he simply fail to master the one law no gangster can break? Don't outshine the men who made you. Look again at the stages of his life, like cards dealt in a rigged game. A crowded house in Chicago, a deli where you could taste the power in the air, a boy who watched and learned and caught the eye of men who needed hands they could trust, a crew of kids who went from mischief to menace. The Elmwood Park line crossed and avenged, a near strangling in a basement that taught him exactly where he stood, an ascent built on fear, loyalty, and profits, a flirtation with media that bloomed into obsession, a move to the desert, a place he believed was a promotion, but was also a test. Control the cash, control the streets, control yourself. He did the first two. He failed at the third. When Lefty Rosenthal reinvented himself as a television personality, Tony watched with a mixture of admiration and fury. He saw in Lefty what he wanted for himself, adoration without consequence. But Lefty was a gambler, not an enforcer. He danced around rules. Tony broke them. When Tony began sleeping with Lefty's wife, he wasn't just betraying a friend. He was unraveling an alliance the outfit depended on. Personal life became professional risk. Professional risk became organizational threat. In an entity built on silence, his life became a headline generator. Law enforcement, for their part, couldn't have asked for a better advertisement for their efforts. The Gold Rush raid, the Black Book, the talk show, the arrests with no convictions that nevertheless painted a picture in public that prosecutors could use in private. Every time Tony smirked for a camera, a congressional staffer somewhere made a note: invest more in RICO, coordinate across cities, share information, follow the money, not the myth. And what of Frank Culotta, the friend who turned the lights on? Was he a traitor to his friend, or loyal to a different code, the one that says survival is its own honor among thieves? He had been the best proof the government could hope for, and still, in courtroom after courtroom, Tony slipped away. Why? Because Tony understood the two elements that keep crime alive: deniability and distance. He never wrote, never called, never said what could be implied. He made the people beneath him both dependent and expendable. He turned loyalty into the same commodity he sold on the street. You pay as long as you can, and when you can't, you vanish. Perhaps the most haunting images in this story are the quietest: a father in a deli wiping his hands on a white apron as men with heavy wallets order lunch. A boy watching men receive deference like a tax. A man in jewelry store placing his palm over his mouth whenever he speaks. A casino lounge where a gambler-turned-host shakes Sinatra's hand under stage lights while an enforcer's eyes harden in the shadows. A lonely grave in a cornfield, flattened by weather, found by chance. What do those images add up to? A warning? A pattern? A truth? Tony Spilotro's legacy is a lesson written in neon and ink. Power without restraint eats itself. He could inspire fear across two cities and still be strangled by the silence of men he had once protected. He could command crews and taxes and the obedience of 100 hustlers and still lose to a vote taken in a quiet room where he had no seat. He could cheat systems and build networks and memorize the details of 1,000 schemes and still be undone by envy, arrogance, and the need to be seen. What drove him to such ruthless actions? Was it a hunger formed in a cramped bedroom, shared by 5 brothers? Was it the echo of applause that felt like safety in a dangerous life? Was it pure ambition, asking each morning, how much farther, how much louder, how much more? Or was it fear? The fear that if you aren't the one holding the spotlight, it will be turned on you. And what drives any organization to embrace men like him? Is it faith in their usefulness, or an inability to imagine a different kind of control? The outfit valued the same things most institutions do: results, stability, predictability. It punished embarrassment more than failure. It prized discretion more than kindness. Tony understood all of that, until he didn't. He started to believe that the rules bent for him because the world seemed to. But gravity always wins. Imagine a montage now. Chicago's Grand Avenue at dawn. The Elmwood Park stop sign that turned into a tomb. A dim basement where a man gasps for air under another man's fury. A courtroom where a defendant smiles as the word acquitted erases months of momentum. A jewelry store with polished cases and a ceiling stuffed with microphones. A television studio stage where a rare mix of glamour and grit makes a neighborhood bookmaker into a celebrity. A neon skyline at midnight sparkling over a desert that swallows secrets as easily as sand swallows footprints. And then imagine silence. The silence of a cornfield after the bodies are found. The silence in Chicago after the news travels. The silence in Las Vegas when men who once looked to Tony for permission look instead at their own shoes and change the subject. That's not just the sound of a life ending, it's the sound of a lesson being learned the only way such lessons are ever learned in that world. Too late for the man who needed it most. In the end, Tony Spilotro's story is not just the tale of a gangster. It's a study in the geometry of power, how it builds, how it tilts, how it collapses. It reminds us that every empire, even a criminal one, is an ecosystem, balanced on habits and expectations and codes no one writes down. Break enough of those, and the system breaks you back. The quiet men in shadow remain. The loud man in lights is the one who vanishes. So what do you think drives such men to the edge and keeps them there long enough to change a city? Is it charisma? Is it terror? Is it the illusion that being feared and being safe are the same thing? Tony Spilotro bet that they were. For a while, he won. And then, as every gambler in Las Vegas eventually learns, the house collected. Remember the beginning. A boy in a deli watching men drink coffee and trade respect as if it were tender. That boy never forgot the exchange rate. He built a life on it. He paid for it in the end. And the city that glittered under his gaze kept glittering without him, as if the desert had swallowed not just a man, but also the noise he brought with him. If power is a stage, Tony Spilotro stepped into the center and dared the lights to get brighter. They did. And when the curtain finally fell, it wasn't applause he heard. It was the sound of doors closing. The last noise a man hears before silence takes the rest.